Hi guys, welcome back to the Right Brain. My dad is wearing, he's being subtle about it, but he wants you to notice that he's wearing a Music City shirt because he's in Music City and he's
Very
one of us.
subtle.
We might get this Long Island's boy to start saying y'all soon.
I don't know. I don't think you come at me, y'all. I can't say it. No, y'all.
Yeah, you're gonna start
You
wearing
all.
cowboy boots. Y'all, that is so bad. He's gonna say you guys is.
Use guys.
Oh, sorry.
You two Utes.
You guys. That's what the Italian Long Island say instead of y'all. Okay, so today I think we're going to talk about dyslexia, which is something I am incredibly familiar with.
I still want to talk about schizophobia at some point.
we're going to get to schizophobia for sure. It's going to be a combination of all my issues.
So to start off, I think you represent
Dyslexia?
A cross section of the United States. So if you hear dyslexia, what do you immediately think dyslexia is?
I just think of Robbie and Ty making fun of me for spelling everything wrong growing up.
Okay.
But what do I think it is?
Yeah, what do most people think the definition of dyslexia is?
I think most people think the definition of dyslexia is like misreading words, like reading them backwards or something, right?
Yeah, I think most people think that it's what we call reversing or transposing letters or words.
Yeah.
Where, they write things backwards and that's not the definition of dyslexia. It's nowhere in any definition of dyslexia is that in there. It's actually often associated with dyslexia, but that's not the true definition of dyslexia. The definition of dyslexia by most organizations is that, first of all, it's a neurological issue. So it recognizes that it's a brain issue. And it has to do with a problem with word reading. So meaning that you just have problems reading words, and that even though you've had enough education opportunity, right? Because if a kid, let's say, never went to school, then of course they may not be able to read words, but they've gone through enough school and they have average to above average intelligence. So on IQ tests,
yeah, that's right.
they have average to above average IQ, but yet they still struggle with reading words. And that may have something to do with what we call phonemic awareness, which is hearing the sounds of the letters or the syllables,
okay,
and being able to make sense of that. So, for me, the way I look to define it is that if I'm looking at a patient, and let's say it's a kid, and we do academic testing with them, and one of the things we do is we'll look at word reading. And if they're, let's say a 10-year-old kid and they're reading 2 grade levels behind in word reading, to me, they're dyslexic. That's the definition. Otherwise, there isn't a clear-cut test or anything that says you are dyslexic. But, so just because somebody reverses a letter once in a while or transposes does not mean they're dyslexic.
Okay. I mean, but I definitely am.
I think you would probably have fit that criteria because along with dyslexia, so first of all, learning disabilities as a whole, like having some sort of issue learning, whether it's spelling, reading, math, memorizing things, is pretty common. It's probably about, I think, 20% of the entire population probably qualifies for some sort of learning disability diagnosis. Out of that, about 85% of it would be considered dyslexia. And then dyslexia for numbers is really known as dyscalculia. So that's kind of like, and a lot of people have both.
Okay.
So it's very, very common. I mean, it's really, if you look at anything it's more common than ADHD, even though they often come together. So it's, again, they're often diagnosed together. But
wait, that just reminded me, and now I have to read this out loud. Okay, guys, this is what it's like growing up with a neurologist father. Dyscalculia. Oh, now I'm going to try and spell it in my notes. It's in here somewhere. But One time, remember, okay, he made fun of me because I bit into a French fry. God forbid you mix up your finger with a French fry more than once. So
Yeah, well, that's
what?
the thing. You did it more than once.
So what? And then, so I think I did that. We were like sitting having dinner recently, and I said something else.
Wait, you just
And
went over that a little too fast.
okay.
Explain that. You literally were eating French fries and you bit on your finger as if it was a French fry and you didn't know it.
Okay, well, first of all, I was a kid. This wasn't like current day. It was a mistake. And did I do it maybe once or twice more? Yes. Was that concerning? Probably. But that's all to say. We were having dinner recently, and I think I did something like that. And every time, because this has been my dad for my entire life, every time I do something and I can see like his like wheels turning, like his eyes will start to like drift off, and I know he's diagnosing me. And so remember there's a, basically you told me there's a certain part of the brain that you're dyslexic, you have dyscalculia, you have finger agnosia, which what the hell is finger agnosia? And there was like one other thing, and you were like saying that means that like the T5 of my brain is damaged. And then I was like, okay, are you trying to tell me that my brain is damaged? And you're like, I don't know. I'm just saying. You have all those very specific things: finger agnosia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and I forgot what the other one was.
Right, left confusion.
Right, left. Yes. I have to put up my fingers to see if it's right or left. Okay, whatever. Maybe part of my brain is damaged.
So
what's she going to do?
The formal term for that is called Gerstmann syndrome.
See, this is what I'm talking about.
And it actually is from an area called primarily Area 39, or your inferior parietal lobule, on the left side. So if someone actually gets damage to that part of their brain, they get those things. So that means that they'll be dyslexic, they'll have dyscalculia, and they'll eat their own finger because they won't know it's their own finger.
That's so specific. I cannot believe that you could diagnose all of those things and it happens to be a part of your brain that's damaged. But I don't know how that could have happened. But anyway, you just got to keep living
really,
like this.
But you see, this whole thing, you don't have damage in that part of your brain, but it wasn't really it wasn't as mature. It wasn't as developed. And it was being shut down because your right side was so high. So that same area on the right side has to do more with reading other people and looking at facial expression and body gestures and hearing tone of voice and trying to extract out of that what emotions that person is feeling. So really what we call nonverbal social communication, that area on the right brain. It's also an area of tremendous creativity, and where kind of all this kind of comes together. So yours on the right was so high that it kind of shut down that on the left, and that is why you ate your own finger.
Well, thanks for making me feel better about it. Okay, sorry, back to dyslexia. I just needed to give that little tidbit. But yes, I feel like I have dyslexia because I was always the slowest reader in school. I still, like, if I read a page, I'll be like, oh, I just spaced out that entire page. Or I skip lines while I'm reading, and I'll skip over them, and then I have to go back. And then I do mix up, like in sentences, I'll like read something completely wrong, like how the words are put together. So I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of things that can be related to that. You also had problems with your eyes, where your eyes weren't perfectly aligned and didn't work together so great. Which is partly what was related to this imbalance in your ear system, which would make you have motion sickness all the time. And again, all of that is more common with overactive right side of your brain. So that is also a thing that many people find, that they're very slow readers, because if you're having a tough time. So the left brain is about sequencing things. It's about taking small details and linking them together like in a sequence. So a series of letters and sounds come together to make a word. A series of words make a sentence. A series of sentences make a page, and pages make a book, right? So that reading, and the left brain is very sequential and step, and it goes more slowly than the right brain. And as I told you, I think people that are very right brain gifted, because the right brain takes in a lot of information from multiple channels at the same time and instantly analyzes it. And puts it together, and then subconsciously, intuitively, kind of knows something. The right brain doesn't speak to itself, so it doesn't have words. It just kind of instantly knows something, and it is in tune with multiple things at the same time, paying attention, thinking about multiple things at the same time. And the right brain can do all of that, and it's very fast, and it's bigger than the left brain. The left brain, it can only do really one thing at a time, and it needs to do it in slow sequence. And so people that are right brain dominant, that are used to thinking really quickly and doing things really fast and not really having to verbalize it, when they're in a classroom as a kid and they're like, no, you have to read this letter, you have to read these words, and you have to do it slowly. And, whereas the right brain just really wants to look at people and look, I'm going to look at your body posture. And I know what you're thinking. I know what's going on, or I can already figure on what's going to happen in this room in the next second with the way I'm just seeing people interact. The left brain is like, no, we have to extract specific facts and information and do it. And I just think that dyslexic people, their right brain is so strong and so gifted that to be able to slow it down and fit into this left brain model of education and world, it's really hard. And so to do that, to be able to go, okay, I got to read each letter and each word, and it's really hard to do that. It's hard to slow your brain down to do that, and it makes you read very slowly, or even what feels even more slowly for you. And that is something that often goes along with that. But again, having eye problems can have something to do with that. There's something also known as Erlen syndrome, where,
the lenses?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
where
cool.
people may, like, the words seem to move on the page, or it looks like, like the white spots in between may look like rivers running down the page. And because all of this involves the left brain, the cerebellum, your ability to coordinate your eyes to go slowly and then come back. You may overshoot or undershoot. So there's many different things that can go on that can contribute to it. Mm-hmm. But it's a big issue, and you see it. It's always a left brain deficit, and it's always people that are unusually gifted in the right brain.
Yeah. My dad had this woman come over a few years ago for me and my brothers, because I definitely have trouble reading and everything. And as you've explained it, warm colors stimulate your left brain and cold colors stimulate your right brain. So this woman put lenses in front of our eyes that were different colors to see how we could like read better and see the page clearer. And it was actually really fascinating. Of course, mine ended up being like a magenta color because I'm very right brain and I needed to stimulate my left brain. But it was like the perfect combination of colors to like make the words pop out and read easier. I don't know. It was very fascinating, but that was just another side note. I'm a little ADD today.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Well, it kind of goes with it. But yeah, the way that was noted was there was a Dr. Erlin years ago that noticed that kids that had dyslexia or alexia, which means they couldn't read at all, if they put different colored paper, like acetate, over the paper, so it wasn't just white and black, that they might be able to read better. And so there was something. They never really explained it very well. I looked into that in my book, and because if you look at the way colors work, as we said, most of the time it was like yellow or pink or orange, and those are all left brain colors. So those colors in lenses may help people read better, or putting it over paper or using different color paper may help read. But all of this kind of goes back to the late 70s, early 80s. There was a guy named Norm Geschwin who was a neurologist at Harvard in, I think at whatever the hospital, Mass General. And he would research a lot of this stuff. And he did 7 autopsies where they looked at people that were dyslexic, that were known to be dyslexic. And one of the things they noted about them was that all these people were gifted with certain right brain skills. Like they were gifted as, athletes or architects or, visual, spatial type of skills. And all of them really struggled with basic word reading. And so when they did the autopsy, they saw that physically there was a difference in their brain where there's an area called the planum temporale, which is really actually that same area that we're talking about, that area basically 39 or in that area. And most people, because language is on the left side of our brain, most people it's bigger in that area of our brain, and it's smaller on the right relatively, even though the brain may be the same size. But that particular area, in all the people with dyslexia, they saw reversed symmetry, asymmetry, meaning that the right planum temporale was larger than the left, and that area where, again, language is, which is also where reading is, was typically smaller. So they, from the very beginning, showed that it was absolutely had to do with this asymmetry in the brain, and a different type of asymmetry. And there was even a physical difference, which you don't often see. So again, it's been very clear from the beginning that it's a neurological issue in the brain and has to do with what's happening where the left brain is delayed or injured and the right brain is really super, super, super strong and gifted.
Yeah, it's interesting you said something about athletes, because I remember like all of the best athletes in high school, especially the guy ones, for some reason were struggling with dyslexia and like behind in math and everything like that. And I know that's something that you've touched upon before, like kind of like the dumb jock like stereotype, and I kind of felt bad because it was odd that it seemed to be obviously a lot of people that were very gifted athletically were struggling with, I guess, dyslexia and dyscalculia, but it was definitely, I could see a correlation between the two.
Yeah, and so that's another thing, is that most people some people may listen to this and go, wow, that sounded like me, but I never was diagnosed with dyslexia. And that's because schools will never use that term. For the most part, most schools, especially most public schools, will never actually diagnose a child with dyslexia. They don't use that term. Not 100% sure why that is, but because maybe because they look at it more as a neurological than a learning issue. And so I see a lot of parents and will test their child and will say, your child dyslexic, and they get really mad. They're like, how could my school never tell me that? Why wouldn't they tell me my child? Well, you're in resource room, you're getting reading help. They may diagnose your child with having a reading disability or a phonological disorder. That's basically the same thing, but they don't use the term dyslexia. But it's obviously a well-documented term in neuropsychology. We know, dyslexia. There's a neurological model for it. And so that's where a lot of people may not understand that. And a lot of great athletes are really much more right brain dominant. And that's what makes them a good athlete. Anybody that's played sports knows that really being a good athlete, especially with team sports, you have to be able to see the whole field at the same time. You intuitively know what to do. You can't think. You just have to kind of react. So you really being in your right brain and just intuitively knowing what to do, how to move your body, and just, knowing also what your teammates are thinking and what they're going to do and anticipating. And that's all right brain skills. And that is primarily what makes someone a really good athlete. But that same ability is going to make it really hard to slow down and do things one step at a time and learn things through memorization over and over, which the right brain, likes novelty. It doesn't like to do the same thing over and over. And it's also, the right brain does something called catastrophic forgetting, which means that we have to forget information. We can't just have all this information in our head, just like in your computer. At a certain point, you have to kind of get rid of it. You have to delete some of it. And if our brain really just kept every memory that we've ever had, it would be so overwhelming and overloaded, which is what happens in a lot of people who have left brain dominance, people with ADHD, left brain, or with dyslexia, or with autism. They have photographic memories and they never forget anything. And is a lot. So the right brain is basically about forgetting stuff that's not important. It kind of cleans our memory systems out. But if the right brain is too strong, then you can't memorize things without your right brain eliminating it. So,
that's good to know.
yeah, that's why, I speak with a lot of parents. They'll tell me, we sat down last night and we went through the times tables or we studied this history, and they knew it. They went to bed. I knew they knew it. They could recite it. They woke up in the morning and it was like it fell out of their head.
Yeah.
They just forgot it all. And that's because the right brain is more about forgetting things or suppressing things. And so it makes very hard for people with left brain deficits to be able to memorize facts and details and recall them. But yet they'll never forget like a personal memory or something that like an emotional thing.
Yeah, I can remember like every detail of like a story that happened. But yeah, I stuff in school, I have no idea.
Right.
Wait, but that I actually was gonna ask you because I know a lot of times you say like, so you're saying, oh, in school they don't use the word dyslexia, but they'll put you in like a reading class, and then like someone will sit there and teach you how to read. But a lot of times you say like when you're trying to help someone do things, like if someone's sitting with you trying to teach you to read, but that's not what you want to be doing, that's not what you're good at, like is it making you better because practice makes perfect, or are they approaching it from the wrong way? It should be approached differently?
Yeah, they're approaching it from the wrong way because it is a brain issue.
Yeah.
And that part of the brain that reads hasn't emerged yet. We talk about that the brain grows. And as it grows, different skills emerge in different areas of the brain and allow us to do certain things. If the brain's not growing and that skill isn't coming out, and maybe it's not growing because the same area on the other side actually grew too much or too early or is too strong, and it's preventing that side from physically, literally growing or coming out, then trying to teach that skill in an area of the brain that hasn't grown yet to do that doesn't make sense. It's going to be frustrating. We know that for the most part, getting a child with dyslexia to read more isn't going to make them read better. That you have to do something to change their brain. You have to get that left brain to come online, and you have to look at why isn't it growing? Like, so again, what is the thing preventing that growth from happening, and create more balance in the brain. So you really have to deal with it from a neurological, and even there are different reading programs out there, but the ones that are most successful are what's called multisensory, which means these kids are using things like they're using their hands, or they're manipulating things and physically doing, or writing in sand, or they're doing things with their sensory systems at the same time, which is really kind of feeding into their brain and helping it to develop. And if you're teaching them to read in that way, then they may learn it better. So, but just sitting down and trying to get someone to read who can't read is not going to work.
Yeah. That's so interesting because I feel like, I feel like my worst subjects, well, I feel like I was very bad at reading, and I was very bad at test taking. I was like the slowest test taker. And then I was also really bad at math, except for one year I had a very hot math teacher and I did really well because I think I was just trying to do good. But
that's a classic right brain thing right there, right? Because the relationship, right brain people can learn better than anybody, especially if it's emotionally significant. If something really matters, like you really care about it,
yeah,
or you really like somebody, or you're afraid of being embarrassed, people can learn anything, and do even left brain stuff better than left brain people.
If it's emotionally driven.
But if it's not emotionally significant, if it's boring, if it's something that I'm not that interested in, so. You having a hot techer, all of a sudden you became a math genius.
I was a genius. Look at that.
You're Einstein.
For 1 year. No, but it's funny because I feel like you always say like the language of things is the right brain, but like that, then like the technical side, like, so it's like the reading and the spelling, terrible at that. But then even so, my favorite subject in school was English because I thought it was so easy. Like we would read like Shakespeare and we would read these books and then we would have to give these like reports or we had to stand in front of everyone and like say what the double meanings were of things and why this was happening. And I was like, I didn't even have to prepare. I remember like I just thought for everyone it was so easy, but I was like, great, let's dive in. This means this. And he said this because underlyingly it meant this and it rhymed with this and whatever. And I could do it without even looking at the book or without even writing it down or like making any notes for myself. And I would always like, I was great at it. And it never occurred to me that that wasn't like something that came easy to other people. But then it was like the other people that were just like amazing at math that were like, why are you so bad at this? I was like, I don't understand any of this.
Well, that's the thing. You know, when you look at it, different people are good at different things. Some people are, you know, more talented in. What does that mean? To me, it means that an area of their brain that does that skill is stronger. It's more wired. It's more connected than other people naturally. And I was the same thing growing up. For me, I loved English because I was really great at understanding what the story was about, what the hidden meaning was, and
yeah, I couldn't read it that well.
That's
but
reading
I could
comprehension. So what we see, and this is a mistake that people make also, they may say, well, someone's dyslexic and they struggle with reading comprehension. That's not usually how it works. In fact, people that are dyslexic are usually exceptional with reading comprehension, which is kind of crazy because I remember I had one kid years ago, and we do what's called a WIAT, which is a Wechsler Individual Achievement Test. That's like the gold standard of academic achievement. And we look at word reading and reading comprehension. And this one kid was just like 4 or 5 grade levels below in word reading, but was like 2 or 3 grade levels above his age in comprehension. The kid could barely read the story, but yet he got 100% of the comprehension questions right. And it was just, how do you do that? How do you, when you not even reading, how do you comprehend? But that is the way it works, and it's pretty amazing. And we see that all the time when we see someone that has a left brain deficit or right brain is strong, and if we test them, their reading comprehension is usually well above. It could be well above their age. I mean, I just had a kid the other day. Again, he was 6th grade. He was word reading at a 3rd grade level, but comprehending at a 9th grade level. So there's a 6-year gap in this like 10-year-old kid. I mean, how do you explain that? The only way you can explain it is through this model of brain imbalances developmentally. But that's built on because his father was dyslexic as well. His father was a great athlete. You understand? I mean, so I didn't even know that you were really that good at understanding that part in school. I didn't know that, but I know that that's exactly what I liked about it as well too. And I felt like I was really good with that. I loved that. And that's the comprehension piece. And comprehension doesn't mean, like a lot of people, like if I talk to a parent sometime when they're young and I'll say, you know, what's your child like in reading comprehension? And they'll go, oh, they're great. They're like amazing. I'll say, well, when I say comprehension, I don't mean that they can recite every detail and fact of the story, right? So remembering details of the story, that's one thing. That's more of a left brain skill. But it's the main idea, what's called inferences or pragmatics, where what's the whole story about? What is the author trying to tell you? Why did the character do what they did? What were they thinking at the time? What were they feeling? That is really real reading comprehension. And that is something that, right brain people do exceptionally well. And that's what you were saying. You couldn't read well, but you could comprehend better than most people.
Yeah.
And that's that. Again, the only way you can explain that is that you have certain areas of your brain that are unusually strong, and that same area will make the other side weak. And one side of the brain is reading words. The other side of the brain is comprehending those words and looking at the bigger picture of it. And so that goes along with your music ability and your songwriting ability. You're a writer, but yet you're dyslexic. Like,
I know.
It sounds like, how could that be? And most teachers, in fact, are taught that reading comprehension, that if you understand all the words, that reading comprehension is just simply understanding the words and then putting it all together. But they're completely different networks in the brain, and they're completely different skills. And so just because someone may be able to read the word and understand each word, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? When you put them all together, it doesn't mean they're going to understand what that means. And kids that have right brain delays, or that may have ADHD or on the autism spectrum, they may read early. We get those kids that have hyperlexia. I mean, I had one kid from England that was reading at 8 months. I just had a kid the other day that, this kid is mostly non-speaking, but yet he could read a book and word for word when he was 18 months old. And the parents thought, well, he's memorized the whole book. He just memorized it, which in and of itself would be unbelievable, right? Imagine a kid can actually memorize a whole book. But no, he was reading. He was actually reading it at 18 months. So that's when the left brain comes online too early, and that area of the brain comes online. And these kids start out where, the parents and the teachers are like, these kids are genius. I mean, they're reading it too. They know their numbers, they know their letters, and their memory is phenomenal. And then they get to be like fourth grade, and they're like, they can't comprehend what they're reading. They don't understand it. And they read directions to a test, and they read it perfectly, but they don't understand what the directions are really saying, because they can't put it all together.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I wish that they, when I was younger, that they could have seen our strengths in those things. Because I remember, instead of labeling groups 1, 2, 3, and 4, it would be blue, red, yellow, and green. But they would be just out of random, these 5 people are in blue. And then you'd get to you, and I'd be like, you don't have to tell me yellow means that I'm an idiot. Okay. I looked around. I used my social skills. Those are the people that can read. I'm in the group that can't. Thanks a lot. But yeah. I could comprehend it. Guess they didn't want to figure that out.
And that's the other thing about this, is understanding this is important in school, because now you get this kid that is this big right brain dominant who is hyper aware. So there's been studies showing that the salience network, which is the network in your brain that basically says, okay, this is important, pay attention, is really super wired in the right brain with dyslexic kids. And especially for facial expression and emotions, so that their body subconsciously reacts, and it creates this stress response when they see facial expressions, and especially negative facial expressions like judgment or disappointment or something like that. So now you get this kid who is big right brain wired, is hyper aware of everybody's facial expression and emotions, and is, afraid of being judged and embarrassment. And then you make them stand up and read, and they can't read.
Oh, yeah. No.
And read out loud. And that is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Did you have to do that? Did they make you read out loud?
Yes, and I would just sit there and I would count all the paragraphs. I'd be like, this is this many paragraphs until I get to here. And then I would try to read the paragraph so that when I got to me, I would already have it smoothly. But yeah, even now, if I have to read something out loud, I'm like, you know what? How about you just read it? Because I sound like I'm 6 years old. It's insane. But yeah, the embarrassment of that was pretty bad too.
Well, and what goes along with that, again, is not being able to spell so well.
My ability to spell is insane. Half of my friends in college, they saw, this happened with multiple of my friends, where they saw their name and how I spelt it in my phone. And they were like, we've been friends for years, and this is how you think my name is spelled? This is crazy. I'm like, I sounded it out.
That's right. It's all phonetic. Right?
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the thing. It's you try to write phonetically, but you can't really do that, because, there's something called decoding that the left brain does in the brain, where it kind of hears the phonics and the syllables, and you're not quite making that out right in the left brain.
Yeah.
And then spelling, again, being able to remember, because a lot of spelling is just remembering how to write the letter. I mean, if you try to really write or spell phonetically, it doesn't work so well, because
apparently, yeah.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And then along with that can often come what we call dysgraphia or dyspraxia, which is where handwriting is not so good.
Wow.
Especially if
This
you're a
episode is
lefty.
turning into just
Especially if you're a
picking
lefty.
out all the things I can't do right.
Yes. But, this isn't just a big coincidence, and it's not, you look at it and it's also why you're great. I think we might have told this story before, but, the old Miss Chaffis story about how because your spelling was
a tiny little
terrible
mean woman
and your handwriting was bad, that you wrote a poem and she thought that you plagiarized it. She thought because she didn't think you were really capable of writing like that. But the writing was so good that she just said, this doesn't match. This child can't read. They can't remember things. They can't spell so well. Their handwriting is really poor. How could they write such an incredible poem? And that was where she said, you must have stolen this from somewhere.
Yeah. I would say, take that, Miss Chaffetz. But she was like already 80. She's probably dead.
And you're in third grade and you're already taller than her.
Yeah. She's so mean. Anyway, yes, that's a perfect example, I guess, of like reading comprehension and the other side of things. Yeah, my handwriting is terrible.
And then that brings us back to what you talked about, again, the dumb jock theory. Now, if you look at any athlete, a great athlete, you look at Michael Jordan, you look at, a great, Lionel Messi, you look at anybody and you watch them and they're geniuses on the field, right? I mean, their level of like basketball intelligence or soccer intelligence is just incredible. I mean, they can see things, they do it. And so how could that person be dumb or thought of as dumb? And why would they be dumb? Well, they're considered dumb because many of them are dyslexic, or they struggle with reading or remembering or learning facts. And so it was always thought of, well, they're these big dumb jocks, and the right brain is really more the dumb brain. It's not, doesn't have words, and the left brain is really the articulate and, intellectual brain. And, and all of that is really wrong. And some of that made it over to people that are actors not being smart, or, maybe certain, artists. But it really is just this whole right brain, left brain thing. And they have this visual spatial skills that are a genius level, 3D spatial skills, or how they move their body, or writing a song or painting. But yet, again, that genius doesn't necessarily fit into what we consider to be, genius in academic terms. Someone who can do math problems or do, chemistry or, that type of thing like that. But it's really just a matter of, and the important thing, like with dyslexia, like everything, and it bugs me when I hear it all the time, is if you read about it or Google it, they're going to say it's a lifelong problem that you can never change, which is completely BS. I can't even begin to tell you the amount of kids I've worked with in my career that were no longer dyslexic and actually were better readers. I mean, we just had a kid recently that started out, he was in 7th grade and he was reading at like a 3rd grade level, comprehending at like a 4th grade level. And within 1 year, that kid was now he was in 8th grade. He was reading at a 10th grade level and comprehending at a 10th grade level. So he was reading 2 years above what other kids would read.
Wait, you said reading at a 10th grade level, but comprehending at what?
At a 10th grade level as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because he was already comprehending better because of this. And the kid was, really loved sports. He was a good athlete. But when his parents brought him to me, it was because he was so emotionally reactive. Any sort of criticism, he would go nuts. And he would, especially with his mother. And he would even, physically hit her. And they didn't understand it, and he would get so upset, he'd get so angry, and then he wouldn't do it in school, and then he started doing it with his friends, and it was just out of control. And he was labeled with dyslexia, but they had no idea what to do about it. But we completely changed that in 1 year, where his mother in the beginning had showed me like his report card, and it said all these really negative comments about him, Again, that as far as he was failing like most of his subjects, and he was also very emotionally reactive, and he was disruptive in class, and he was very oppositional, and he was always, because of task avoidance. At the end of the year, she sent me a new report card, and all of the things that he was bad at were now being listed as his strengths, and that he was like
Oh,
a leader in
wow.
the class. He was one of the best kids. He's one of the best readers. He does great in math, and he, he's very sympathetic to other kids, and helps other people. It was a complete turnaround. In fact, that family, they were originally from Mexico. They live in Houston. They reached out to me because their, I think, cousin or something is a documentarian in New York, and they want to do a documentary about it.
Yeah, they should.
Because they are like, we were told that nothing could be done, and this completely changed our son's life in 1 year, exactly as you said it would. And so that's the thing. When people hear that ADHD, you have to live with it. Dyslexia, you just have to live with it. You don't. I mean, you don't have to. And that person is gifted somewhere. Whether they're showing it or not, they are gifted. And we don't take away the gift. Like, that kid didn't lose his ability to comprehend the story better than most people. Like, so.
Yeah. So when you go through your program where you're helping kids, which like in school, they normally like, well, they can't read, so we'll just make them read more, and they can't do this, so and that's not really the actual approach. It has so much more to do with balancing out the brain, and also whatever you're gifted in won't come down, as you're saying, it'll stay there, but you're working up the other side to make it better.
Right. Or if they take the approach like, well, let's just focus on the child's strengths and ignore their weaknesses, then you're never going to correct the problem.
Yeah.
It's only actually going to get worse, because you're going to be using the area of your brain that's stronger, which is going to suppress and hold back the other area even more. So you need to get them to use their weaknesses, but you need to understand what the source of that weakness is, that it's a neurological issue, that it's developmental, and that you have to literally build up that area of the brain like building a muscle. And if you don't, then it's never going to get better.
Okay, great. I think we covered a lot here. All of you people that thought you were the dumb jocks or couldn't read or write that well. Honestly, I remember all the people that got held back in math one year. I was like, damn, that's a cool group of people. But it's probably the year that I had a hot teacher, so I was too genius to be in that. But that's all to say, you're not stupid. Everyone has their own strengths. And yeah, it's really, I think it'll probably be very healing for people to hear, especially that reading comprehension and reading are completely different things. And we all have our own strengths. So that, it was honestly low-key kind of healing for me to hear, because I'm dyslexic.
Yeah, and that's where some people can overcome it. Like, I remember the one time that I used to take you guys to the bookstore, to kind of give your mom a break, or when she was away. And
Barnes and Nobles.
If it was rainy or something, we'd go to Borders
Borders,
or
sorry.
Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
Borders no longer exists. But I used to go there, and I used to go there and dream that someday I could write a book or something. But I bring you guys, and I remember, I would say to you, pick out some books, and then we'd go and we'd sit and we'd drink chai tea, and you guys would sit there and read through books, and Ty would always get like more like comic books, and Robbie would get something, and you would get something. I remember this one time you got this book that was like the diary of a young girl, and you loved it, and you were reading it in the Barnes and Noble. And then we went home, and you sat on the kitchen floor.
I remember that, actually.
And read the whole book. Like, the rest of us were watching some TV. Mom was away somewhere, I think. And you read the whole book, almost the whole book. And then it was time to go to bed. And you sat, when we still used to have the wall phone, you sat underneath the wall phone on the kitchen and just read. You were so enthralled with the book. And then we went upstairs, and you said, I'm almost finished with this book. Can I read it and then go to bed? And I was like, yeah, okay, because you had done that. And you did that. And then the next day you came and you said, there's another book in this series. Is a series of these books. So that was great. But again, it wasn't obvious that you were struggling with reading. And I guess your comprehension is so good. So when you read a book, you must get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I
Like,
was
you
getting
must,
all in that world.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you must get a lot out of it. So in that part, you could like reading or really love reading because you get the meaning of the story, and novels especially, and if it's a really good book. But the actual reading itself is so hard and laborious for you that you don't read that much.
Yeah, this is very true.
Yeah.
That's why I love podcasts. Hey, look at that. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, like I've said, guys, every episode, if you have any questions, if this sounds like you, send me a little message and we can talk about it more in depth. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for being my dad.
My pleasure, honey. Thanks for being my daughter.
Okay, until next time.
Love you.
Love you.